AITAH for moving on just a couple of weeks after my divorce was finalized? My husband and I were together for 15 years. We were married for 10 of those years. He is 49 years old, and I am 40. For a long time, our relationship looked stable to the outside world. We had history, shared routines, and a life that appeared settled. We were the kind of couple people assumed would stay together simply because we had already been together for so long. 5 years ago, my husband cheated on me. That moment did not cause an immediate explosion. There was no dramatic breakup, no screaming, no instant separation. Instead, something much quieter happened. Something inside me broke in a way that never fully healed. From that point on, life became worse, but not in obvious ways. I still functioned. I still showed up. I still lived my daily life, but everything felt slightly heavier. Even now, years later, when I can honestly say that I am healed as much as I will ever be, happiness feels different. Any joy or excitement I experience is always a little muted. It is as if part of my emotional range was permanently lowered after that betrayal. When I confronted my husband, he never gave me a reason for cheating beyond saying that he was a bad man and a cheater. He did not blame stress, loneliness, or temptation. He did not blame me. At the time, I hated that answer. I wanted something to analyze, something to fix, something that could make the betrayal make sense. It took me a long time to realize that he was telling the truth. He cheated because he could, and because he chose to. I told him that I wanted a divorce. I told him clearly that I would never be his wife again. Not my body, and definitely not my heart, would ever belong to him again. This was not said in anger. It was said calmly, after something inside me had already shut down completely. He begged me to stay. What made everything more complicated was the timing. I was 39 weeks pregnant when I found out about the affair. I was physically exhausted, emotionally overwhelmed, and preparing to give birth. I was trying to process betrayal at the same time my body was preparing to bring a child into the world. There was no space to grieve properly. There was no space to make clean decisions. After I gave birth, the first year passed in survival mode. Life slowly settled into a new reality. We did not repair the marriage. We did not rebuild trust. Instead, we adapted. We became two people living under the same roof. Our baby became a buffer between us, something that allowed daily life to continue without forcing us to confront the truth. We never fought. We never argued. From the outside, everything looked calm and functional. But emotionally, the marriage had already died. I was still physically present, but something essential in me was gone. That was the foundation for everything that followed. After the first year passed, our lives settled into something that looked stable but felt empty. Our child was no longer a newborn. The chaos of the early months softened into routine. We had schedules, we had structure. We knew how to exist in the same space without causing friction. We were two people living under the same roof, but not a couple. Our baby became the quiet center of everything. In many ways, our child was a buffer zone between us. Conversations revolved around feeding times, sleep schedules, doctor appointments, and daily responsibilities. We talked efficiently, politely, carefully. Anything that might touch emotional ground was avoided without ever being explicitly named. What stands out to me now is how calm everything appeared. We didn't fight. We didn't raise our voices. There were no arguments that spilled over into the night. To anyone looking in from the outside, it probably seemed like we had somehow worked through the betrayal and moved forward. But that calm wasn't peace. It was resignation. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to punish him. I wasn't trying to make him feel guilty. I had simply stopped expecting anything from him emotionally. And when you stop expecting, there is nothing left to fight about. Every day flowed smoothly. We woke up. We took care of our child. We went to work. We came home. We ate meals. We went to bed. It was functional, efficient, and emotionally hollow. I felt like I was playing a role rather than living a life. After the 1-year mark, my husband began to shift. He started talking about us again. Not cautiously at first, but gradually, as if testing whether enough time had passed. He referred to the future in terms of we. He spoke as if the worst was behind us, as if what had happened was a chapter we could close and move on from. At first, I didn't push back. I told myself that maybe this was how healing worked. Maybe one day it would feel natural to slide back into being his wife. Maybe time would soften the edges of the betrayal. But when I tried to imagine it, really imagine being his wife again, my mind couldn't even hold the thought. It wasn't resistance in the way people usually describe it. I wasn't arguing with myself. I wasn't debating pros and cons. My brain simply shut down. The idea felt impossible, like trying to force myself into a space that no longer existed. The reaction wasn't intellectual, it was physical. My chest would tighten without warning. My heart would start racing. My hands would shake. I would feel a sudden wave of panic that made it hard to breathe. I wasn't choosing these reactions. They happened automatically before I could rationalize or explain them away. I started having panic attacks. They came at unexpected moments, sometimes after a conversation where he implied closeness or intimacy. Sometimes after he spoke about us in a way that assumed I was still emotionally there. Each time, my body reacted as if it were in danger, even though nothing overtly threatening was happening. That scared me. I didn't understand why my reactions were so intense. I wasn't living in constant fear. I wasn't being abused, and yet my nervous system was responding as if being pulled back into the role of his wife was something it needed to protect me from. I didn't tell many people about the panic attacks. On the outside, I still looked composed. I still handled my responsibilities. I still showed up for my child, but inside, I felt like something fundamental was misaligned. My mother noticed that something wasn't right. She saw the way I shut down when certain topics came up. She saw the exhaustion that went deeper than lack of sleep. She was the one who suggested therapy. At that point, I agreed without hesitation. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand what was happening to me. I wanted to know if there was a way forward that didn't feel like I was betraying myself just to keep the peace. We went to therapy because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't go as a formality, and I didn't go to prove a point. I went because I genuinely wanted to understand myself. I wanted to know whether something inside me was broken, whether I was stuck, or whether there was a path forward that I simply couldn't see yet. We stayed in therapy for about a year. Session after session, we talked. We talked about the affair. We talked about the baby. We talked about trust, communication, forgiveness, and rebuilding. I tried to be honest. I tried not to shut down in the room, even when the conversations made my chest tighten and my stomach twist. What therapy gave me was language. It helped me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't stubbornness or cruelty. It wasn't me refusing to move on. My body was reacting to something it no longer perceived as safe. Every time the idea of being his wife again came up, my nervous system responded before my logic could intervene. No amount of talking could change that. Outside of therapy, my husband continued to tell me that he missed me. He told me he wasn't feeling good. He told me he felt lonely, disconnected, and afraid of losing our family. I listened. I didn't dismiss his feelings. I didn't mock them or minimize them. But I asked for a divorce again. He refused. That refusal was one of the most isolating parts of this entire experience. I had already emotionally left the marriage, but I was still living inside it. I felt like I was trapped between two realities. One where I was no longer his wife, and one where I was still expected to behave like one. At some point, the pressure became unbearable. In a moment of exhaustion and helplessness, I told him something I never thought I would say. I told him that he could sleep with other women instead. I didn't say it to hurt him. I didn't say it sarcastically. I said it because I felt completely out of options. He became furious. To him, the suggestion felt insulting and degrading. To me, it was an expression of how disconnected I already felt. I wasn't offering an open marriage. I was admitting that I no longer had the capacity to be his partner in the way he wanted. I told him that I felt helpless, that I didn't know how to make him understand that I couldn't go back to being his wife. That role felt closed to me, no matter how much time passed. This cycle continued for months. We talked. We avoided. We talked again. Nothing moved forward. Nothing resolved. Our lives continued to look stable on the outside, but inside, I felt like I was slowly suffocating. Then, last summer, something finally changed. He told me that he was completely broken. He spoke about his anxiety around aging, about turning 50, about realizing that his life didn't look the way he thought it would. He said he couldn't do this anymore. For the first time in years, we were aligned. We both acknowledged that we needed to go our separate ways. The next day, he moved out. After he moved out, the house felt different immediately. The constant tension of living with someone who still wanted a marriage I could not give was gone. In its place was a quieter kind of weight. The understanding that what we were doing was real and irreversible. He was the one who filed for divorce. The process itself was slow and procedural. Paperwork, waiting, legal language that reduced 15 years of shared life into formal sentences and signatures. Emotionally, though, the ending had already happened long before any documents were signed. The divorce was finalized just after the new year. Before that, we made a decision that felt important for our child. We spent Christmas together, the three of us, as a last shared holiday. It wasn't joyful, but it wasn't hostile either. We kept things calm and gentle. We opened gifts. We ate meals together. We tried to create a sense of normalcy, knowing it wouldn't last. I remember thinking that this was our quiet closing chapter. Not a reconciliation, not a tragedy, just an ending done as carefully as possible. After the new year, when the divorce became official, I mentioned it casually to my work bestie. It wasn't a dramatic announcement. I simply said that it was finalized, that something long and heavy had finally reached a legal end. I knew my story wasn't exactly private at work. People talk. Stories spread. Still, I didn't realize how closely some people had been following it. A colleague who worked on another floor overheard our conversation. I had seen him before in passing, but we had never spoken beyond polite greetings. What surprised me wasn't just that he knew about my divorce, it was how many details he knew. When he asked me out, he wasn't shy about it. He didn't pretend he didn't know my situation. He acknowledged it directly. That honesty caught me off guard. It was unexpected and slightly uncomfortable, but also strangely refreshing. I didn't agree immediately. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't trying to date. I wasn't trying to replace my ex-husband or fill a void. But after thinking about it, I said yes. The date went better than I expected. Conversation flowed easily. There was no pressure, no expectation, no attempt to define anything. I didn't feel judged. I didn't feel like I was being evaluated as a wife, an ex-wife, or a failure. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was simply a person sitting across from another person. That feeling stayed with me longer than the date itself. Around the same time, another major shift happened in my life. My son began living with me every other week. Logically, I understood the arrangement. I knew co-parenting would involve shared time. I told myself I was prepared, but emotional preparedness and intellectual understanding turned out to be very different things. The first time I told my son that I would see him again next Friday, something inside me collapsed. I felt hollow. The house felt too quiet. The air felt heavy. On the drive home, I had to pull into a parking garage because I couldn't see through my tears. I sat in the car for a long time, trying to calm myself down, trying to breathe, trying to remind myself that this didn't mean I was a bad mother. It just meant that I loved my child. When I finally got home, I was completely drained. Not just tired, but emotionally empty. I didn't have anything left to hold myself together. That was when my colleague texted me. He asked how I was doing, and without planning to, without thinking it through, I told him the truth. I told him how empty the house felt, how hard it was to let my son go, how lost I felt in that moment. About an hour later, there was a knock at my door. He was standing there with sushi, ice cream, and cake. Nothing dramatic, nothing symbolic, just food and concern. I remember feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not because of the gesture itself, but because someone showed up when I felt like I was falling apart. He stayed with me that weekend. There were no promises, no labels, no declarations about the future, just presence. And at that moment in my life, presence felt like oxygen. I still don't know exactly how my ex-husband found out about that weekend. What I do know is that my neighbor saw me with my colleague. We live close enough that people notice who comes and goes, especially when routines change. I didn't think much of it at the time. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't sneaking around. I didn't feel like I was doing anything wrong. But someone noticed, and someone talked. By Sunday morning, my phone started blowing up. At first, it was a single call, then another. Then messages started coming in one after the other. My ex-husband, his family, my family. People I hadn't spoken to in weeks suddenly felt entitled to comment on my life. The words were harsh and unfiltered, reckless, disgusting, shameful. Some messages were long and emotional, filled with accusations and disappointment. Others were short and sharp, like verdicts that didn't require explanation. It felt like a courtroom where the judgment had already been decided without my presence. My ex-husband called me repeatedly. When I finally answered, his voice was full of anger. He called me heartless. He called me disgusting. He said I had no respect for what we had shared, no respect for him, no respect for our family. I panicked. Not because I suddenly agreed with him, but because I could feel the situation spiraling out of my control. I knew what was coming next. I asked my colleague to leave immediately. It wasn't because he had done anything wrong. It was because I felt exposed, vulnerable, and suddenly unsafe in my own space. He didn't argue. He didn't question me. He just nodded and left, understanding that something serious was unfolding. Early that morning, around 7 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, my ex-husband was standing there with our son. He didn't come inside. He left our son with me and then turned his anger directly toward me. He told me I was the worst human being he had ever met, the worst mother he had ever seen. His words were loud, sharp, and absolute. There was no room for conversation, no space for explanation. He said he couldn't understand how I could move on so quickly when he still couldn't even digest the fact that I wasn't his anymore. That sentence cut deeper than anything else he said. Not because I didn't understand his pain, but because of what it implied. The idea that I was still supposed to belong to him, that despite the betrayal, the years of emotional distance, the divorce, there was still an expectation of ownership. After he left, I stood in my doorway holding my son, shaking. I wasn't shaking because I regretted my choices. I was shaking because I realized how completely different our perceptions of the same relationship were. For him, the marriage ended when it was officially declared over. For me, it had ended years earlier. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I kept checking my phone, half expecting more messages, half hoping they would stop. When I finally spoke to my mother later that day, I was desperate for understanding. I explained everything. I told her how overwhelmed I felt, how isolated I was becoming. She surprised me. She said she understood where my ex-husband was coming from. She said what I had done was wrong, that hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just disagreement. It felt like a rewriting of my entire experience, as if the 5 years of emotional survival didn't matter. As if the panic attacks, the therapy, the long period of living in limbo counted for nothing compared to one weekend. Throughout the week, the judgment continued. Calls from family members, messages from people who thought they knew what was best for me. Even friends hesitated. Some avoided taking sides. Others tried to be neutral, as if neutrality were possible when one person felt completely alone. I felt isolated in a way I had never felt before. It was as if the moment I showed any sign of moving forward, the permission I had to be seen as a full person was revoked. After that week, something inside me shifted again, not in a dramatic way, but in a quieter, lonelier one. The calls slowed down, but the silence that replaced them was heavier. It wasn't relief. It was the realization that the people I expected to understand me either couldn't or wouldn't. Even those who knew the full history hesitated to stand fully on my side. And that hesitation hurt more than outright anger would have. I started replaying everything in my head, over and over, trying to figure out where the line was supposed to be. I questioned myself constantly. I wondered if I had crossed some invisible boundary that everyone else could see, but I somehow missed. My ex-husband then told me that our son would be staying with me full time instead of half the time, as if that were some kind of consequence. He didn't frame it as a conversation. He framed it as a decision, as if parenting time could be reassigned based on moral failure. The irony of that didn't escape me. I love my son. I have always loved my son. Being with him more is not a punishment to me, but I don't want my child used as leverage. I don't want him to absorb the idea that one parent gets punished while the other gets to decide what is fair. What disturbed me most wasn't the logistical change. It was the implication that my worth as a mother was suddenly in question because I had allowed myself to be seen as a woman again. That accusation stayed with me. I kept thinking about the words my ex-husband used. The worst human being. The worst mother. Those are absolute statements. They leave no room for complexity, no room for history, no room for context. And yet, when I stripped everything down to the facts, I couldn't find the moment where I had stopped being myself. I didn't abandon my child. I didn't cheat. I didn't lie. I didn't move on while still married. What I did was survive 5 years in a marriage that had already ended emotionally. What I did was try therapy. What I did was ask for divorce more than once. What I did was accept the end when it finally came. And when I was alone for the first time, truly alone, without my child in the house, I allowed someone to sit with me. That is the act people seem unable to forgive. I think a lot about how differently this would be perceived if I had left immediately after the affair. If I had packed my bags 5 years ago and rebuilt my life right then, no one would be questioning my timeline now. But I didn't leave then. I stayed for practical reasons. I stayed because I was pregnant. I stayed because I was trying to be responsible, to create stability, to survive. And now it feels like I'm being punished for staying. It's as if people believe that because I endured the pain quietly, the pain doesn't count. As if emotional suffering only matters if it is visible and dramatic. Because I didn't explode or collapse publicly, my grief has an expiration date that others feel entitled to enforce. What also hurts is the way ownership keeps creeping into this narrative. You're not mine anymore. That sentence keeps echoing in my head, not because I don't understand his grief, but because of what it suggests. I was never meant to be owned, not before the affair, not after it, not even during the marriage. And yet there is this expectation that I should still behave as if my body, my emotions, and my future belong to someone who broke our vows long before I did anything that could be questioned. I have empathy for his pain. I really do. I understand that seeing me move forward forced him to confront a reality he wasn't ready to face. But empathy doesn't mean erasing myself. It doesn't mean freezing my life until he is comfortable. And it doesn't mean accepting punishment disguised as morality. What I'm struggling with most right now is the isolation, the way people pulled back the moment I stopped fitting into the role they were comfortable with. The role of the patient, suffering woman who waits quietly for permission to live again. I don't want revenge. I don't want validation at any cost. I don't even need everyone to agree with me. I just want to know if I actually did something wrong. Because from where I stand, my marriage didn't end a few weeks ago. It ended 5 years ago, the moment trust was broken and never repaired. Everything after that was a slow, quiet process of coming to terms with that reality. I didn't move on quickly. I stayed still for years. So now I'm asking this question openly, even if the answer hurts. Was I wrong for allowing myself comfort after years of emotional loneliness? Was I wrong for behaving like a single person when I had already been emotionally single for half a decade? Or am I being judged for refusing to continue playing a role that no longer fit, simply to make others feel better about my pain? I honestly don't know. All I know is that I am tired. Tired of being measured by standards that change depending on who is watching. Tired of having my motherhood questioned because I dared to exist outside of someone else's expectations. Tired of being told that my healing has a deadline. So I'm leaving this here. AITA?